Okay, so I'm going to take you back in time. I was fifth in line, four sisters in front of me, Army family. My dad was a combat vet. I knew how to shine combat boots before I knew how to ride a bike. I had a strong military surrounding growing up. Didn't know what a civilian was, that type of thing. Back in 1979, the space shuttle landed at Bliss Army Airfield, which is right next to Fort Bliss. It was the Columbia. Scrawny little kid, fingers, wrapped around a chain link fence, looking at the flight line with the 747 Columbia on top of it. During that time, I was able to actually talk to the commander of the flight crew, and they were doing public affairs type stuff and signing photos and stuff like that. So that kind of triggered the airplane love in me. I grew up in El Paso, Texas. We didn't do the whole moving around like most families did. We had one PCS in Germany. So, growing up, my influence was actually my four sisters and my mom, more than my dad. My dad, typical Army, got commissioned. He made it to Chief Warrant Officer 4, that type of thing. He was an electronics warfare technician, so radars and Hawk missiles. And that was a really interesting time learning about all that. But four of my sisters, three of them started dating people in the service. Started with the Navy, went to the Marine Corps, then it was the Air Force, and my fourth sister, she was not part of that. So the most influential part for that was I was at an age where when my third sister was dating the Air Force guy, I was at a point in my life where I wasn't a third wheel anymore. I started to become part of the group. And he was the one who influenced me more about joining the Air Force than anybody. So I think about things like this. I think about, who is it that I've met in life that I didn't know back then, but I know now. I hear everybody else's stories and stuff like that, and some of the bases that they were at, and some of the cities that they were at, and I always think back and I'm like, I wonder if I met them, if I knew them, if there was a connection, if there was anything else that influenced my life or their life. My brother-in-law, his name was Mark. He was a huge influence on me. In fact, he was more of a male father figure than my dad was. Joined the Air Force in 1984, went to basic training, went to tech school at Chanute Air Force Base, Illinois, which is the same base that they taught all the missile men, how to turn keys for the nuclear weapons and stuff like that. So when you enter the base, they had one of the Minuteman missiles, on display, on static display. And when you enter the base, it's really daunting to see how large that missile is and the amount of destruction that something like that can actually cause. I started to develop this understanding of life, but I still didn't know how to apply it. Went through tech school. One day I get into my dorm room. There it is, sitting on my bed, my orders. My first duty station was the Philippines. Overseas location right off the bat. Fast forward, a year or two, I'm starting to understand my job, which is an aircraft mechanic. Everything that had to do with the structure of an aircraft, that was my job. I still remember to this day, and this is really funny because we were talking 1985, I still remember the very first airplane I worked on. I still remember all those, and those are still memories that are very, very much attached to, me and my time back then. Then comes our first TDY. First temporary duty. So we went to South Korea. There's an exercise up there that happens every year. It's called Team Spirit, and it's all four services. We are set up in what's called Tent City. 10,000 plus tents, 10-man tents. Dead of winter, diesel heaters. So there's literally run by diesel dripping, and that's how you heat the tent. So in the middle of the night, you have this glowing red thing in the middle of your tent. The first thing that, the people that have been there a while, the first thing they do is you go downtown and you buy a copper kettle pot so that you can put water in it so you can have some type of humidity in that tent. because it's literally just heating everything and burning everything out of there. You're trying to figure out, how you're gonna do your job. I'm sitting on the alert pad, which was an F4 under a hardened structure, right off the flight line. Everything, all the tools that we use, they're all pneumatic. Everything's run by air. Well, they have these compressors that you can tow behind trucks. So these things had a muffler on top. So you would literally go up to the aircraft, drill what you needed to drill until it stopped, and then you go down to the muffler and you put your drill next to the muffler until it heated back up, and then you go back up and you drill and do what you need to do. It's one of those things where you look back on it, and even during the time, you're like, oh, this is kind of ridiculous. But everybody in the service has similar stories of we did what we had to do. I go through a couple of these different types of team spirit. So we were actually sent up there from the Philippines like a month to a month and a half early, because they would shut down our runway to repair it. So we got down there before anybody else got down there. But while you're in Tent City, everybody is everybody's friend. The camaraderie was something that you can't recreate. You can't do it in the civilian world. When you're standing side by side with somebody at 32 below zero at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you're repairing an aircraft, or you're someplace else in the heat of the desert, that's something that is not out there. That's something that's internal. Having the ability to have a lifelong friend after 3 months is something that you can't do outside the military. There's not enough. So here we go. We're doing team spirits. We're doing a couple of times a year. 1 year I go up, and we're in Tent City, and all of a sudden we hear the scream of an F4. Most of the time we can listen to an airplane flying overhead and go, oh, that's a C-130, or that's an F-15 or something like that. We're standing outside just all chilling out, and we heard an F4 go by, and it sounded off. We could tell it was an F4, but it sounded off. So sure enough, everybody looks up, and you can see, the whole team just kind of look over, and this F4 is lower than it should be. Smoke trailing. All of a sudden, you see it dip below the trees, and then come back up. It was in trouble. It had lost all hydraulics. It had lost all electrical, and these two young captains decided that their entire mission was going to get that F4 away from as many people as possible. So after it bounced off the ground, it turned sideways and it landed at the opening of one of those hardened shelters. One of its engines actually went through that L opening. Everybody from Tent City, we could see the fireball. First thing that happens is big voice comes off and it says, emergency, 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 that type of thing. Everybody stay in place. So all of us were sitting back trying to figure out, what's going on. Fast forward to, they investigate the whole thing. Unfortunately, the both pilots lost their lives. They do a briefing in one of the largest hangars that we have, and they showed the video from the F4's cockpit. They didn't show it all the way down, but they showed it enough. They showed enough to show what the pilots were going through. And if you know anything about a fighter jet, you don't have a steering wheel, you have a stick. And the pilot in front seat, you could see his movements, and he was fighting that stick in every direction possible. You see it, you see the video when he hits the ground, and that's when he actually lost all power on his engines. And it literally bounced him up and into the hardened shelter. All of us sit back and we're watching this, and it's a very surreal moment because everybody in that maintenance hangar had worked on that airplane at one point in time. So part of Team Spirit is we take our F4s with us, so they're coming in from the Philippines. We fly on a KC-135 refueling aircraft. We have 6 jets with us. We refill them all the way over. Other KC-135s are also taking what we have is they're called the Aggressor Squadron. So So we had a squadron in the Philippines. They were F-5s, like they look like a MiG. The F-4s, they are all painted differently, but they're all painted like a Russian aircraft. So the F-4s, they basically chase the F-5s is what it's all about. What actually happened is that during that maneuver, something happened where something broke loose, and it started with the hydraulic systems. And that's what took out the hydraulic systems first. Mm-hmm. So they were way, way out to sea, making it back to the base, and their initial thought was to try to get them to just land. But then they realized that they were never going to have the height. So it was that moment where things kind of changed for me, because then it was like all of a sudden, the whole life and death thing kind of became, front and center. I started to take my job a little bit differently, a little bit tighter, a little bit, but I realized in that moment, that was one of those defining moments for me, that everybody in one place, we were all on the same page, and we're all there for each other. Something had happened in our lives that changed it. It's the easiest way to say it. The position I'm in now, it's not something that I ever foresaw myself doing. I wanted to become a mechanical engineer. The Air Force actually changed my life quite a bit, because one of the things I didn't touch on is that, space shuttles and stuff like that, I wanted to become an astronaut, but I found out I was colorblind, and you have to have perfect vision to become a pilot. So at one point, I decided, well, if I can't fly them, maybe I can work on them. And that's where that set me down that track. But then, if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been in the position to see what it was that I saw that day. And, one of the things that I found interesting later on in life is that I could feel the pressure and the heat. Now that I'm here and I'm in this moment, I'm like, that day was yesterday for me. It's ingrained in my memory. The camaraderie is one of the things that I'm trying to continue on here in this position. I've been active duty. My base was BRACT, and we did a reduction in force, so we did RIFT. Then I got into reserve. Then I got out, got married, became a military spouse, and a stay-at-home dad a year later. I was a stay-at-home dad for 17 years. And here I am some years later, and now I'm sitting in a director's role here at the center. And now I'm here to try to make your lives easy by creating whatever I possibly can so that you feel comfortable to be here. We have so many different stories that I've been listening to these stories for a very long time, but they're not recorded, they're not taken down. And it's one of the things that I really miss about my dad. My dad was War Story Central. That's one of the reasons that I jumped in with both feet. I wanted to get to this point so that I could open the door and let everybody else know that it's not that hard. It's not that hard. It's your story, but it's a different story. And if it makes a difference, if it opens up one of your ideologies to telling the story, I've made my case. My assistant in there, I call him Marks, because that's his last name. And that's mainly what we do in the military. It'd be either AJ, my nickname was Viggy, I actually got that. I thought I actually got that from my dad. My dad's name was Viggy, but I proved a point to him. I told no one when I went to basic training what my nickname was. Yeah, by the end of basic training, everybody's calling Viggy. Because my last name is Vignault, I guess. I don't know. After a shift, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning or so. I'm sitting in just my T-shirt. We're sitting in the tent, all 10 of us, and we're having a beer or whatever. And it was, I think back in those moments, and it's like, those are great moments. You're tired, you're hurting. It's 30 below zero out there. The only thing that's keeping is, canvas, keeping that cold out, but you're having a great time.
When you first heard from Jennifer about the storytelling process, what was it that What was really the draw for you in terms of your own personal story and then the school's participation?
For me, it was more of the generational gap. You know, when you get to a certain age, you start looking different. We start having, different colored hair and stuff like that. But one of the most important people in my life, my daughter, has been the most influential on how to connect with the younger generation. So for me, when I heard that, it was a matter of, okay, well, I have a story to tell. It's my story, but I know there's other stories out there that I would love to hear those. Mm-hmm. So for me, that was the big draw. It's like, how do we look at multiple generations across the board, and how do we get them out there? And if it takes me, being in the hot seat, to let everybody know this is easy. We're just having a conversation.
You have mentioned that you would like to see an opportunity in the future for that kind of event where people could come and share. So anything else you'd like to say about that?
One of the great things about the center that we have here, right next door, this used to be the music room. And right next door, we have 2 soundproof booths. And having the ability to shut off the world and tell your story, record it, write it, whatever you want to do. I think that's one of the great things about what we have here. As long as we can utilize the soundproof booths, and that would give people a sense of security, safety, to be able to open up, to record some of these stories. Doing some of the events I've done and being, a presenter and stuff like that, being, behind a podium, behind a mic is one thing, but when you start, you kind of get to that point to where you're vulnerable. I don't like to see myself in interviews and stuff like that. There's something I did for SOS Radio, and I still have yet to see that. But that one, I kind of felt really confident about that one. This one, really, the editing was done really well. When you watch yourself talk, and it felt easy. So for me, it was okay. It was that comfortable. If we were in maybe another room, might have been a different story. I don't know, but I liked it here.
In terms of the broader civilian world, have you had opportunities where you felt there was a comfort level in sharing stories?
You get a mix of, military and civilian, and you kind of feel that there's a stopping zone, about how much you're going to share with, civilian versus military. Mm-hmm. Not going to deep dive into a few stories that we would if I was, hanging with, my military, brothers and sisters and stuff like that.
Now, you happen to have, in the bigger picture, a story of the importance of military service, and you took it from there. What was that process like for you? Was it, did your story just start to develop?
Well, for me, I guess the launching point is, what did I want to convey? One of the things that we always talk about here is military transition. It's not an easy road. I grew up in, with my father being in the Army, I grew up in the military life. There was a very short amount of time before I joined the Air Force myself. And even after I got out, I was still tied in the military. There's all types of stories that I can tell where that military tradition is still there. And it's, what message did I want to convey? So I brought it back to the very beginning, which was my father. So it was kind of, this is the path that I walked, before I did any of this. And this is the path that I walked while I was in, and what it felt like for me to be, friends and longtime acquaintances with certain people. I have scrapbooks and stuff like that. That growing up, that's what we did. We always had photo books and stuff like that. But most of these photos never made it to a scrapbook, so it was just a menagerie of photos. So as I'm going through them, it's it's the people that I missed. So as I'm going through them, I'm like, oh, Smallwood, oh, Jeff, and I'm going through all these. I start thinking back. I wonder where they're at. If somebody hears a story that makes them think a little bit more about gender and race and sexual activity, all that kind of good stuff,
can we really be one big world and one big happy family? Yeah, I mean, why not? We could change minds, we could change opinions and stuff like that. Open up that mind. Daily lives change. People's lives change, and it could be everything from the weather to your car breaking down. But if we can adapt to whatever works for each individual, then we be able to expand these stories in a way that we can maybe get more.
I thought we could spend a little bit of time maybe sharing some of the photographs.
There's this picture here, and is this sunset or sunrise?
It's morning sunrise. I actually wrote on the back of it.
So it's, and in a way, it's just how I imagine it, but it's so good to see it. And then it's got a picture of the inside. And you go, oh man, yeah, it's as bad as I thought. I think a lot of people in military life know this picture. It's like, it's cold, there's nobody around, and I'm on a truck at 4 a.m. And I think just putting it in there, these 3 photographs add a lot to the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
When you just say, we were in Tent City.
Yep.
And you can run them over 10 seconds. I'm looking at this photo, and then I'm looking at this photo.
Mm-hmm.
And and here, especially, I see a lot of the same guy. You're happy, you have some facial hair, there's a confidence about you. And it's nice to make the parallel. People become something else, but there's always something that it's a little bit the same. And if you can put that with a visual in the story, it's very important.
This was just one of those moments that have no idea who the guy is next to me, but I know that there's somebody there who is in my shop, that we were doing this together, that camaraderie was there. That was the importance of that one.
And I think this picture is two soldiers with gas mask on. But I think if you put this picture, when you say in 3 months you can make a friend for life,
Mm-hmm.
I think this reiterated the fact, because it's very intense time.
When we were in this exercise, your work basically stopped. It wasn't until the transition that I got into 5 years later, that they started to train you to do your job in all of that gear. You see that transition again. If you're in chemical warfare or something like that, what are you going to do? Well, you're still going to do your job, but you don't know how, because you have these, the gas masks we had back then are a lot different than what's issued today. What's issued today is one big huge view, whereas there we had these 2 goggle size. How do you handle tools, let alone your weapons?
And I saw you brought, this must be your dad.
That's my dad.
And can you tell me what this picture means to you?
So my dad, and he called it this, he had an ego wall. And he had this one wall that had all of his stuff on it. It had all of his medals and all of his awards and pictures and stuff like that. And, growing up, it was commonplace for us. But it wasn't until after the first interview that I picked that up and I realized how influential he was in my military life. When we left the service, we were the last to shine boots. So we had black combat boots, and we shined them every night. When I found this picture, it actually kind of shifted. It went from the everyday normal seeing him in uniform, seeing the ego wall and stuff like that, to realizing how much he had influenced my life in the military. There's my dad.
Oh, can we get a side by side?
This is me in the Air Force uniform. Somebody in the Army was telling me that, they were like, oh yeah, he's what'd you say, a Spec 7 or something? I didn't know much of his rank at that time. I know he made it to Chief Warrant Officer, but one of the things for military, we look at uniforms. We look at the transition to uniforms, because that was the first uniform I wore. So, I look back at that, and, if I look at somebody else's pictures, you can tell what era of the service they served just by the uniform they wore. I mean, we went through 3 uniform changes, in my small career in the Air Force, and the one where I'm in front of the airplane, that's the BDUs. So, we all thought that was the coolest uniform because we had to start blousing our pants and everything. So I look back and I see that person and I'm like, wow, it's such a different change nowadays.